Aloha, you're listening to the Bungocast. I'm your host, Bungo Man. Currently, it is 56 degrees with a wind chill of 47. I'm joined today by It's Not Real. It's Not Real, how are you?
Pretty tired, kind of late. How about yourself?
I'm actually exhausted. It's been a pretty eventful day for me. Spent some time hanging out with some friends and did dinner with my dad, so it was pretty good. So the reason I brought you on today is because I wanted to talk about the project that you've been working on, speakeasy.im. First off, can you tell me what it is?
Yeah, so ultimately, right now it's nothing. It's kind of trash. I want it to be a privately runnable Discord replacement, sort of like the days of TeamSpeak and such. TeamSpeak doesn't have screen sharing. It doesn't have nice chat features. Or it didn't. They recently released a new client that may address some of that. But the motivation for that is with the advent of AI and some of the more advanced machine learning, Discord has started scraping people's texts. They've started recording the audio and transcribing that to text. People have been catching bans for things that happened literally over a year ago. And so that was kind of the original motivation, just to have your own private voice channel where you can hang out.
Oh, wow. I had no idea they were doing that. All right, good. That's good to know.
Yeah.
So you've been posting a lot on Twitter about Speakeasy and the things you've had to go through to get it up and running. That's really kind of what has got my attention, is just how much stuff you've had to overcome. Can you give me kind of just a brief overview of the architecture of it, sort of just how the client and server are structured and how they communicate?
Yeah, so the server and the client are both using a library called MediaSoup. MediaSoup is a WebRTC framework. So WebRTC was invented, I don't remember how long ago, but there was a need for low latency real-time communication using web browsers. By default, that works kind of on a peer-to-peer basis, and people have implemented libraries to make that a little easier to where you can put it to a central server and scale it better. So on the server side, it's using MediaSoup server, and that is running in Node, JavaScript, and it is using Fastify, which is a server WebSocket type thing. I don't know how familiar everyone will be with different web frameworks, but lots of people used to use Express. Fastify is a little newer, I believe. That's what I went with. And doing everything over WebSockets. So the client and the server are continually talking to each other and linked. Then on the client side, I'm using Electron, and that has been a nightmare. And then the Electron piece is two parts. You have a Chromium web browser and a Node.js engine kind of on the back. And Node has the ability for C++ extensions. And I was kind of reading that might have been more of the original intent with Node. I don't know how true that is, but it turns out people don't like writing C++, so that's why we have a lot of JavaScript packages. The C++ part has gone through a lot of different iterations. Originally, I wanted it to be platform agnostic, because the rest of Electron is you can run that on Linux, you can run it on Windows, you can run it on a Mac, and probably even publish to Android. So I started out looking at FFmpeg and a few other things. I think just some native C++ utilities to just kind of capture some stuff. The problem with FFmpeg is the licensing is kind of a nightmare. I'm not real sure how lots of applications get away with using it. They have a lot of very specific rules, and there's an entire FAQ page at FFmpeg that is probably like 3 or 4 pages long. They're Stack Overflow posts trying to decipher the license. It's pretty crazy. So I didn't want to do that. There's another program called GStreamer that lots of people use, but ultimately I wanted something that was self-contained, where I didn't have to worry about licensing, I didn't have to worry about performance, and I could really dig down deep into the internals. And so I started with the Microsoft Media Foundation APIs. And this is my first time ever writing C++. All my stuff has been JavaScript or Python. There's been a tiny bit of C# and some PHP way back. So I've never gotten this low level before. So that uses DirectX and some other built-in Windows capabilities, captures those frames and the audio and joins them together with kind of a global timestamp in the program, and then pushes that through to the node side, which further pushes it up to the Electron side or the Chromium side. So that's really high level. We can go more in depth there, but there's a lot to that.
I would like to. The Windows Media Foundation stuff is really kind of what got my attention, because I've done some Windows programming, but it's been probably close to 2 decades now. I understand that you use that to capture the screen and take that, and I assume you put it into some kind of buffer somewhere. So what's the process like of taking that data from the Media Foundation API calls, whatever is returned there, and then actually getting that into Node? Because that, I don't know a ton about that, but that sounds kind of like a nightmare.
So the actual frame capture is happening with DirectX. So that's outside of the Media Foundation APIs.
Okay. And
DirectX can capture the raw frames of a monitor or a application. I don't know how that works with DRM'd media, because if you use Discord or some other applications, you can't actually share your screen with Netflix on it and stuff, because there's all this enhanced DRM. I don't know what happens when you're grabbing the raw pixels of the screen. So DirectX has this feature called a capture frame pool, and it's built specifically for capturing a frame of an application. But you have to tell it what application you want to capture. And that actually turned out to be a whole separate issue, because many things that Windows reports as Windows are not actually Windows. So,
no, they are not.
Yeah.
Window is a very broad term in Windows.
So luckily on that front, I did find some existing C++ libraries that were free to use, MIT licensed, that filter out a lot of the common issues people have with that. So as of now, whenever you look at what screens you have available to share or what applications, I haven't found anything that's incorrect, but I haven't done a lot of testing on that part. So you get the handle ID, and you simply pass that to the DirectX frame capture pool. Then it will capture the frame as quickly as it can, and it uses an event system to push that to another function. The way that it captures frames, though, is a very specific format for the color. It's a RBG, I believe, and that color format is pretty much incompatible with almost everything else outside of DirectX. So you can't convert that color pixel format into, H.264 for MP4s. You can't convert it into VP9, H.265, nothing. You have to convert that to some other pixel format. And the most popular one that I was able to find is NV12. So as I get those frames, I have a conversion that happens on those as they enter in that function that gets notified when a new frame is captured.
Are you passing in a callback function here?
No callback functions. So at one point in time, I had some callback functions, but I'm either not a good enough programmer or it was overly complex. And I may end up coming back to some of that, because performance right now is a little lower than I would like. But essentially, it's pushing frames as fast as it can, and we're trying to hit 120 frames a second. So if we drop a frame or so, it's not that big of a deal. So no callbacks. It pushes that to a shared memory buffer that is a triple buffer. And so then the other thing that you have is the Media Session Manager. And so the Media Session Manager is taking those NV12 frames, and that's when it starts putting those into the encoder. So to walk back a little bit, you've got the frame pool. The frame pool is capturing the raw pixel data. And as it gathers those, they go into a queue that gets pushed to another function in an event system. And then that function, as soon as it gets those, converts those to the NV12 pixel format. And then that gets pushed to the Media Session Manager. And the Media Session Manager is what is part of the Windows Media Foundation. And then separate to that, you have to capture the audio. Audio is completely separate. It's not using DirectX or Windows Media Foundation. It is using the iAudio client. And there are 3 different versions of that in Windows, as far as I've been able to tell. Supposedly, Audio Client 2 and Audio Client 3 are backwards compatible with the previous version. So 2 is just supposed to be an extension of 1, 3 is supposed to be an extension of 2, 3 has a bunch of new features. I was never able to get 2 or 3 to work. I changed nothing except the number on the import statement. So I'm using Audio Client version 1, And with that, you have to give it the process ID of the audio that you want to capture. That can be a little difficult because some of the programs that you're going to want to capture have multiple process IDs. So I have a process ID traversal function. So it figures out what process the window handle that you passed along to it belongs to. And then it begins walking up. And I've got some heuristics in there because you can end up walking all the way up to explorer.exe. That's probably going to need some more testing and debugging because nobody wants to record audio from something they didn't mean to. But as of now, just with the use that I've had, I've not managed to capture any audio that I didn't want. So as that happens, I've got a global timestamp, and those audio and frame samples are set to that synchronized timestamp. And media session also uses an event framework. So you have to establish these tracks as they come in, and you have to give it the duration and the timestamp, and it will feed these into an encoder. And there are different encoders. You can do PCM to AAC. You can do NV12 to Windows Media WMVs. In this case, I'm doing H.264 and AAC audio. So the NV12 gets converted to H.264, and the PCM raw audio gets converted to the AAC audio. Then that has to be further put into an MP4 container. And that's where the trouble really began to start. So whenever you're looking at an MP4, a regular MP4, you have to have the entire file to play it, or at least a good chunk of it. You can't pick a random middle section of a traditional MP4 and play that part. So they have what's called a fragmented MP4, and all you need is the very initialization fragment that tells you how many tracks there are, which is the audio track, what's the video track, what kind of encodings you're going to have, kind of metadata type information. Then after that, you can pick any fragment of that file and play it independently. And so that's really good for if you want to pick up in the middle. But it doesn't play very well in a web browser for a variety of reasons. So you're pushing these fragments, and browsers want to play that in order, even if you're trying to get to the latest part. And the traditional video tag has some performance issues. So they invented this new specification, and I say new, it's probably a decade old at this point, called media source extension. And a media source extension is just kind of a way to have more granular control over the media that you're playing in a web browser. And that's most of the videos that you see. That's how they work, as far as I understand. But with that, you have a completely different MP4 specification. And Media Foundation APIs do not support media source extension. So you have to patch these fragments as they are produced by the encoder pipeline. And there's a bunch of different rules, so I had to dig into the specifications on what to expect in a media source extension MP4. I had to learn what the structure of an MPEG file is. And so for that, I started using Bento4 as a library for analyzing media files kind of in a text format. And so there are these boxes is how they structure an MP4. And things that play in VLC aren't compatible with media source extension, and you can't really visualize it outside of using something like Bento or FFprobe, different things like that. And so it's kind of an arduous process to run the program and then see what the fragments look like when you run it through these troubleshooting tools. You can't really do a break statement on it and use a debugger like you can with traditional stuff because you have to wait for that to be produced. And so it's very time consuming because you gotta, start the program, record something, stop, run it to see how the output fragments look if you're having an issue. And then you got browser incompatibility. So I had some stuff that would work in Firefox, wouldn't work in Chrome, vice versa. So a lot of that. And I finally got over that hurdle, I believe, last week or week before last. And I was able to get the audio and the video synchronized and played in a web browser from the C++ extension. And that had taken me almost a year, working in my spare time.
Wow. Yeah, that is a lot there, which is why this has been such an interesting thing for me to follow, just because you've got all of these different pieces that all have to come together and synchronize like that.
The biggest thing has been Microsoft's documentation. I'd run into problems with it before, and I've run into bad documentation in all kinds of projects. This is probably the worst I've ever seen. There are references to libraries that were deprecated, or not even just deprecated. They're no longer updated. They're not maintained. For 8-9 years, and the documentation for it came out a year or 2 years ago. There are undocumented changes. So there have been a few times where I have been searching for something and I've come back later and there's an answer from a Microsoft dev to that question. So there have been things that have been uncovered while I've been working on this, as I've been working on it, from other people doing who knows what. And so there were things where the documentation said the sample size has to be X. And someone posted, my program quit working when I updated the Windows SDK that I was using. Did something change? And about a week later, a Microsoft dev chimes in and says, oh yeah, it looks like the duration for the samples now defaults to this. We'll update the documentation. So there's been quite a bit of that, which is pretty nuts.
That is actually, I'm shocked because, like I said, I used to do some Windows programming in the early 2000s. Most of it, just kind of straight Win32 stuff, and I guess it was called like Microsoft Foundation classes, which is kind of a wrapper around some of that. The documentation that Microsoft used to have was really good. It was called like the MSDN, Microsoft Data Network, or something like that. I can't remember. And it was extremely thorough, and it had copious amounts of examples that were really, almost always exactly what you needed. That's really unfortunate if their documentation has really fallen off there, because it used to be very good, but that was, 20 years ago.
Yeah, I've used other stuff of theirs that has pretty good documentation. I think this is just a fairly neglected library with a pretty small team. Because most people, what they're going to reach for is FFmpeg, if they reach for anything at all. And that kind of goes back to solving this problem to begin with. Like I said, we're looking to move away from Discord, and there are quite a few competitors out there. So you've got Jitsi, you've got Rocket Chat, Matrix with Element, one of those is a protocol, one of those is a client. You've even got Google Meet, you've got Microsoft Teams. All of these programs, the only one that allows you to do simultaneous screen shares with multiple people in a single room is Discord. None of the other places support that. It's always locked down to one screen. There might be some configuration options in Jitsi that allow you to do that. The problem with Jitsi is that it doesn't work. It works fine for voice, but the screen sharing piece is really bad. And what I had a friend who was helping me test all these, because you want two people whenever you're using a communication thing. We went through like a list of 6. All of them are using the same underlying screen sharing technology. And, right now we're using Video Ninja. It's using the same thing as well. So whenever you click to share your screen, that's using native built-in functionality that is in Firefox and Chrome these days to choose a window to share. It works really well for basic stuff, right? If you're wanting to share a screen, show somebody something real quick, hey, click here, collaborate on an Excel document, stuff like that. It doesn't do isolated audio, number one, so you can share sound, but it's going to be the entire system sound, and they usually are able to filter out your voice so you don't have a loop back effect. But the other part is, it's not high resolution, so you're not going to be able to hit 1080p most of the time, and the frame rate, usually not very good. And that's because it's not using a GPU from what I can tell. There might be ways around that. I tried that with the Electron app because it has those same built-in APIs because it's using Chrome. But we just I couldn't get it to capture at an appropriate rate, at an appropriate resolution on Windows. It may be a little different on Linux. And so it's just this built-in piece on Firefox and Chrome that everyone uses. So nobody even cares to try to do this kind of stuff. And so you're either using FFmpeg or you're not abusing the Media Foundation APIs the way I am to try to shove this into a web RTC format.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because I kind of was wondering like why are you doing this? What makes this different? And that kind of answers that.
Well, so part of it was a lot of arrogance on my part, because we were looking for something else for our friend group to use, and that's when me and my friend started evaluating other options, and we even at one point were willing to pay money, for a paid solution that met our requirements. We did find one that might have. They didn't have a demo for us to try, and the cost was through the roof. Like you're talking, it came out to like $2,300 a year or something for a server of like 6 people. So that was out of the question. But I was telling him, I said, it can't be this hard. We're just sharing a screen. That ability has been around for a long time. I refuse to accept that it could be that difficult. And he said, it's got to be pretty hard. And I said, no. So I actually did have a fully working peer-to-peer chat client with screen sharing in less than 48 hours after that conversation. But then that's when we ran into the barrier of the resolution and the frame rate with these native browser APIs. But my thinking after that was, if I can do that in 48 hours, it's got to be possible to build something more sophisticated. And I've had a few successes along the way. So if you don't want audio, it's actually very easy to take that frame pool capture with DirectX and turn that into an MJPEG and stream the MJPEG. I had that working, I think in September of last year or so, and that was full resolution, high frame rate. You're going to lose some to JPEG compression. I just didn't have the audio. And you could do stuff to try to, mix the audio in the client or in the server before you send it out. But then you've got to start worrying about, is there going to be latency? Do I need to give the client some way to adjust and match that delay? So I stepped away from that just because it was suboptimal. And this is probably the closest I've ever had to a passion project. Most of the things I work on are usually me trying to figure out a way to get money. And so this one I've taken a little more care in. I want it to be good. I want to produce something quality because the friend group that I have, they're not going to switch to it if it's a subpar experience compared to Discord, unless we all get banned from Discord. So it's got to be good. It's got to be usable. So trying to do everything right. Now, that was the other thing while going through these C++ APIs is making sure that I'm not using something that's already deprecated, trying to stay on the latest version of Electron, different things like that. I have been surprised at the number of errors that I've run into that are undocumented.
What's the worst one that you've run into so far?
The worst one was on Electron. I was trying to do a screen share thing. This is before I had abandoned using the built-in APIs. The Electron app was working, and I could capture frames and stream them at, 5 FPS, 10 FPS at a low resolution. But I was still doing some testing, and I ran it one day, and it wouldn't work. It would just crash. It would say that the video element was invalid, was the error message that I got, which didn't make a lot of sense. I went round and round and round. I Googled for it. I couldn't find anyone else who had this error. Like there were 0 results. Language models couldn't help with anything. We went down rabbit holes with that. So I took a week off. I come back a week later, and I start digging through the Electron GitHub tickets. And literally, earlier that morning, someone else had reported the same bug. It was a bug that stopped the video sharing from working under a very specific set of circumstances that was introduced in this minor point version.
Oof.
And he was the only other person, I guess, who had run into it. And so he had opened a ticket. I didn't, because I had no faith that it was not my fault. So all I had to do was downgrade. But that, wasted a week and a half. But just various things like that. Have taken up a lot of time, but that was definitely the most frustrating because that was completely out of my control and literally brand new.
Something I kind of want to circle back to, which was keeping the video and audio in sync. How exactly do you go about doing that? Is your C++ extension, are you like starting a separate thread to handle the audio, or is like you call a function, and then it's, you're giving it some kind of callback to handle the incoming audio, or what does that look like?
So the way that it is working, and I should preface this with, I have not had a screen capture running for hours or something. So it's possible that there is some long-term drift there, because we're still in the kind of early stages of just getting something that works. But when those captures kick off, they kick off with the same timestamp. And then as they push samples, that timestamp gets updated. And then the media foundation, as long as you're providing that timestamp, it will automatically synchronize them together for you.
Oh, okay. So the Windows API is handling that.
Yeah, it handles the muxing for you if you keep your timestamps consistent across the tracks.
Okay.
So that part I expected to be more difficult than it turned out to be.
Yeah, because that sounds to me like it would be a pretty big lift. So that's pretty cool that it can handle that just out of the box there.
Yeah.
For the what was it called, the media extension?
Mm-hmm.
What were your biggest challenges with that?
The biggest challenge is that I'm in an abusive relationship with Firefox.
Me too. I haven't used Chrome in 7 years now. I completely ditched it and only open it if someone at work tells me there's a bug in Chrome, which is basically never.
I never left Firefox. I've been on it since, 2004? 2003? But I keep running into things. I know the world is more Chrome oriented, and so there's still web pages that you're going to have bugs on. But there are things that are completely separate from that they continue to do. And so what I found out is whenever you're pushing this media source extension data to a web browser, it is very, very picky. Firefox provides no insight into what the error is, just that it doesn't work. If you have some kind of encoding incompatibility, or the sample duration of the audio track is off, or the video duration doesn't actually match what it said it was going to, Firefox just throws an error and says, media source extension invalid buffer. Chrome has an entire dedicated page called media source internals, I think is what it's called, that gives you all the information. So anytime I needed to troubleshoot the media source extension piece, I had to use Chrome. Because it would tell you, I'm going to try my built-in codecs. The built-in codec failed. I'm going to fall back to FFmpeg. FFmpeg failed. This is why FFmpeg said it failed to decode this. So that was very difficult to try to figure out. And I went and searched to try to see if there was something like that for Firefox, even as an add-on. And it didn't seem like it. I found a closed feature request or bug or whatever in their tracker from 8 years ago, where someone had said, hey, we should have a media internals inspection page. And it was closed as not needed, and I guess never revisited. But I think a lot of that just comes from, I don't know who's using Firefox. I don't know, are developers using Firefox? I don't know.
I am, but I think I might be the only person on my team at work that does. I usually get a comment if I'm sharing my screen.
So yeah. And I think that monoculture also kind of mirrors a lot of the other pieces I've seen while developing this, is a lot of moves towards software as a service. I had a thread about this on Twitter while I was digging into all these documentations and everything. There's just not a lot of open development happening on things that aren't JavaScript. I personally have been very impressed with the large language models. I've used them a ton at work and on side projects, and I think they are pretty great. I know some people disagree and have had bad luck with them, or they're not applicable in some situations.
I've had pretty rotten luck so far, but it's also just maybe I don't know how to ask it a good question. I've got a game engine that I've been working off and on for probably about 7 or 8 years now. It's in C++, and it uses Lua as the scripting language. I asked, I think it was Cursor, which I don't remember what model it was, for some help and kind of just how to move some things around to make it, a little easier to work with. And the answers it gave, just at first blush sounded kind of like reasonable, but then the more I dug into them, the more I realized that, I don't think this understood me at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the work that I do professionally is mostly in Python, to be truthful, it's in Jython, which is a Java-based implementation of Python 2.7, which is miserable for a lot of reasons. But
I can imagine
the amount of Python 2.7 documentation that is out there and therefore in the training data is huge. So I almost never have any problem getting it to do something in Python. And we're also not doing cutting edge stuff at work. We're talking some pretty basic create, read, update, delete type stuff. And even then, most JavaScript stuff, outside of trying to understand React hooks, it also gets most of that right. Once I started getting into the media foundation pieces, there is so little documentation and so few examples. It hallucinates just as much as ChatGPT 3.5 was 2 years ago. And that's made me a little less fearful of the AIs that are coming, and kind of shocked as well.
Same. My experiences definitely made me feel a lot more secure in my job, because I'm sure it could probably handle, some of the programming, at least in the small sense. But when it comes to really, stringing things together, and having a bigger picture idea of what we're trying to do as a business, I don't have very much confidence that, at least the way things are currently, that it could handle any of that, especially since, a lot of the stuff that you have to know is just, it's not in the documentation or in a README or something. It's in conversations that have been had, with coworkers.
Yeah. It has definitely eaten the low end of programming at my job. If we didn't have ChatGPT, we would probably have to have another FTE at this point.
Really? Wow, that's real interesting.
So my job is 50% programming and about 50% application administration.
Can you clarify what you mean by application administration for people who don't know?
So it's good to try to define this. We install programs on, servers. We may have to patch an OS, upgrade programs, kind of general what used to be system admin type things that were related to networking or computers but weren't actually programming. A lot of that. And so we have all these computers out in the field because I do oil and gas. And so we've got these ruggedized Linux computers, and there's 300 or more of them out there. And so we've got to go log in and patch them. And, with Linux, you can script all that. But there are some programs running on those machines that don't really have an API. I mean, you can write something that will go and emulate a web browser with requests or Selenium or something, but that starts getting a little hairy. So we've got some that we have to go log in manually and update. Things like that, kind of housekeeping, making sure we got enough disk space, resizing virtual machines, all that good stuff.
Yeah. And
then on the programming side, most of what we do is lower level. And I mean lower level in the sense of not difficult than I would like it to be. And I'm working to change that and make it a little more complex. But that's a big ship to turn around after 2.5 years.
You mentioned you work in oil and natural gas, which is, I'm sure, all kinds of fun. That brings us to a topic that I did really want to touch on when you mentioned it on Twitter when I invited you on, which is the abiogenic theory of petroleum.
Yes.
So I skimmed a paper by, I guess it's a Gold was his last name. Forget his first name. So I've got kind of an idea of what it's all about. So I guess, can you tell me, what is that theory? And then I'm very interested in what you think about it.
Yeah. So the idea, the origins of the idea, there's a few. So you've got kind of the very conspiratorial version, which is...
Yeah, that's the thing, is this seems to dovetail into some real crackpot
conspiracy
stuff, which is, but also kind of I don't know. There may be something there. So, anyways, sorry. Continue.
No, you're good. So like the most crackpot version is that oil is continuously replenishing in Earth, and fossils and it being a fossil-based fuel were an invention by Rockefeller and Standard Oil to convince people that this was a scarce resource that would run out. And it was this whole fiction that was invented, which also, kind of dovetails nicely with dinosaurs not being real, which is a whole separate kind of topic. And not from the the young Earth creationist viewpoint. But anyways, we can get to that if you want to.
Yeah, I kind of do.
So, but then there's also people who say that it's not like a conspiracy. It's a misunderstanding. And some of the evidence they point to is we have if anyone listens to this and hears me say this, they're going to hang me for probably getting it wrong. But there is evidence of hydrocarbons in different planets and in their atmospheres.
Oh yeah, no, I believe Titan.
Yeah,
the moon Titan is a real good example of that. I think it's like the atmosphere is mostly methane.
Right, and so that they kind of use examples like that to bootstrap into the theory. So it's very obvious that you can have hydrocarbons without ever having life, unless we're going to say that there was life on Titan at one point, or there's life now, or something.
Which is very unlikely because I believe the surface temperature of Titan is like negative 200 degrees.
Right. So they kind of point to that and say, so it's obvious that you can have hydrocarbons without having giant lakes of algae covered for millions of years, etc. And then you get a little more where people are like, well, we keep finding new and new natural gas and oil deposits, which that's mostly a function of finance and technology, in my opinion. You don't ever want to reveal what your actual reserves are. You want to reveal just enough to get funding for the next round. And you want to reveal, you don't want to reveal too much. You don't want to reveal too little. So I think lots of actual oil and gas inventories, at least outside of the U.S., because most oil and gas companies tend to be state-run in other places, are probably held a little closer to the chest than we think. And then there is some other evidence that is a little more borderline. So I believe it is the Anadarko Basin in the U.S., which I believe is in the Oklahoma area, but it may not be the Anadarko Basin. Regardless, one of them that's a major natural gas field has an unusual amount of hydrogen inside of it, if I remember correctly. And some people argue that this points to it coming from a abiogenic source. And so the idea is that there's just kind of oil in the core and mantle of the Earth, and it's continuously kind of coming out. Do I believe that? I don't know. I wouldn't say I don't believe it, but I don't not believe it either, because I just don't think once you really drill into what we have concrete facts in, that there is enough evidence to rule it out whenever you can point to things like Titan and say that there's methane in the atmosphere there. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my take. I'm inclined to say it's not likely, but I don't think it's completely out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, I think that's kind of just, skimming, obviously the Wikipedia page and just, a couple of papers on it. That's kind of where I am. It definitely, it feels though, just like one of those things where like, I kind of want this to be true just because it would overturn, something that like, at least, for me was kind of just like taken for granted, that, oil is, it's not dead dinosaurs, but, dead, mostly, I guess, plant matter, from hundreds of millions of years ago. And I guess from my understanding is like, it's possible that some of the source of it is, from meteorites or comets, because there are comets that have, considerable volumes of hydrocarbons in them, kind of mixed in with water and whatnot.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you're familiar with, the geology of Hawaii, and how that hot spot works.
Not at all.
It's pretty interesting. There's the island chain is being formed by a magma plume that's kind of just poked up through the middle of the Pacific crust, and as that plate moves, the islands kind of continually form and eventually get subducted. But if you look under the plate and look at kind of the gravity of the Earth, there's been some recent studies on the internal structure of the Earth, by looking at the gravimetrics of it. It's clear that there's something kind of in the mantle around that spot. And one of the theories is that that's the remnants of the Mars-ish sized object that smacked into the Earth like about 3 billion years ago. And that's, what created the moon is, at one point, the Earth was, a little bit smaller, and that body hit Earth and then splashed a large chunk of the Earth out into space, and then that recoalesced into the moon. But the core of whatever that object is just kind of embedded in the mantle. And I personally, I don't know if any geologists would agree that this is even plausible. And I personally think that that's responsible for that hotspot, because it positionally is in about the right place for it. And so I don't think it would be terribly implausible if you had primordial hydrocarbons that were formed in gas clouds from whatever star was there previous to the sun, before all the matter collapsed back down into the sun and the planets. If some of the comets or whatever smashed into the Earth and created large deposits of hydrocarbons and in what's now the mantle, like that doesn't seem. The more I've thought about it, the less far-fetched that seems.
Yeah.
But then again, it's not entirely implausible that, okay, if you had a whole forest die and then get covered up, that would get turned into oil or something. But, one of the more interesting pieces of evidence that proponents of the abiogenic theory point to is that where you have the deposits of oil and natural gas, it tends to be through many layers of the crust. It's
right.
Not just in like one little place. It's like it'll be, if you imagine a cross section of the Earth's crust, it'll be like that whole area all the way down is full of hydrocarbons. And that to me is I don't know, man. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not so sure I buy the whole, the Rockefellers were trying, Standard Oil wanted to make it seem like a scarce resource because, even if it is something where there is like just a lot of it down there that's continually being regenerated, it still is something where like how much you have is kind of a function of your technology, and then also, well, how much money do you have? My wife's family on both sides actually were geologists, her grandparents, and so there's some oil wells in the family, and I do know up in Kansas, the horizontal well drilling really unlocks a lot of stuff that just is like, it's there. We've known it's there for like, for as long as ground radar has been a thing, but it only really makes sense to spend the, however many, million or so dollars to drill a well here. If you can, get that straw to go horizontal and just, suck up the whole line of oil that's down there. I'm not sure I buy the, it's a conspiracy to make it seem scarce, because it's, barring, technology or the price of oil going up, it is kind of a scarce thing.
Yeah. Yeah. The horizontal drilling is pretty crazy. It's so revolutionary that I don't think overall culture has still updated, because there's essentially no longer an oil monopoly. There's no longer a cartel. You still have OPEC, but they're pretty much irrelevant. Big oil isn't a thing anymore. And I realize working in oil and gas, that's somewhat self-serving to try to convince people of that.
Oh, no, there's a lot of small players out there. My father-in-law is one of them, where he's got wells that, like I said, if they were just vertical poking a hole down into the ground, like you would never get your return on your investment there. And that technology has really allowed smaller players to have, just a low 7-digit outlay, for 10x that in return.
Yeah.
Over a pretty extended period of time. But yeah, that's definitely been a game changer.
No, we've got wells now that are profitable at like $30 or $40 a barrel, which was just unheard of even since I have been an adult working in the industry. Because whenever oil crashed down to $70 or $80 a barrel around 2013, 2014, that time period, there were mass layoffs even then. And that was really the first big price correction that oil and gas had to grapple with.
Yeah, I distinctly remember that. So my wife's family, or her father, is from a little town in Kansas called Hartner. I've got a Twitter thread on 4th of July in Hartner. I'll link in the show notes.
I think I remember that.
Yeah. And there's a lot of oil and natural gas out there, and the nearest like real town is Alva, Oklahoma. It's probably 20 miles away. And there was a brief period, right kind of, in the point you were talking about, where there was a little bit of a boom, where the population of Alva just exploded, and there was a lot of hotels built, and there were oil people who were basically just living out of hotels, and there a lot of housing being built, and then that all crashed, and it was pretty rough on that whole area up in north central Oklahoma.
Yeah. So I started in oil and gas at the very, very start of 2013, and I worked for a Chesapeake, or what was a Chesapeake subsidiary.
Mm-hmm.
And for people who don't know, Chesapeake was offering salaries and benefits comparable to what you get at a lot of the big tech companies, and in some ways even surpassed that for that point in time. So some examples of things Chesapeake did, and I got to see this for about 6 months before it all went to hell. So just long enough to really understand what I was missing out on. So they had the kind of the typical thing of multiple restaurants on campus, and it was free, all you can eat, and it was high quality food. Real chefs. You could go get a steak for free. Almost everyone had their own office. There were no cubicles. There were no open spaces.
That's the dream.
That spoiled me so badly because I had an office immediately after graduating college, and it took me forever to get another one after that job. They had a house band, so they had a band that was on payroll, part of the company. They did bonuses and raises twice a year, and it wasn't half of your bonus and half of your raise, spread out. It was literally every 6 months a full compensation cycle. They had on-site Botox if you wanted to go get touched up on your lunch break. They had an on-grounds beekeeper. Another thing that they had was there were no salary caps on any positions, as long as you were a full-time employee with Chesapeake. So if you were a janitor on the Chesapeake, official staff, not a contractor, there was no top salary that you could make. As long as you were, the best janitor and you wanted to keep janitoring, if you were getting, 3% raises twice a year, you could be making, good 6 figures as a janitor. There were even some instances of people with lower titles reporting to managers with higher titles, and the lower level employee would have a higher salary. And then the other thing that when I said it may surpass some of the big tech stuff in some ways is they were recruiting people from all over the US. And if you told them, well, I can't, my wife has a job, my husband has a job, whatever, they would find or invent positions for spouses if they wanted you bad enough.
Wow.
And it wasn't, not everyone got that, but it also wasn't a one-off rarity, if you get what I'm saying. Like it happened with some frequency.
And was this in Oklahoma?
Yeah.
So you get that Oklahoma cost of living too.
Yes.
Which is considerably lower than where most tech companies are located.
Yeah. So it was pretty phenomenal, but it couldn't last. It didn't last.
Of course not.
And the final note on that, the CEO of Chesapeake eventually ran his natural gas car into a brick wall and it exploded. So
wow.
Yeah, not a great happy ending for him. And there's a lot of abandoned.
Very segue in.
Yeah. But some of that, I think about how they were throwing money around and how it inevitably collapsed. And I just get that vibe from the current tech sector, but it's been going on for a long time, and maybe it'll keep going. I hope it does. I don't wish anything ill on them. I'm surprised it's gone this long, but it's going. So it's strange to see.
I do not work in anything that I would call tech. I mean, it's a tech job, but it's I work in the medical industry, which is I don't think that's going anywhere. Not anytime soon.
Yeah. No, so you're probably, I would guess, a cost center. Also, we are.
I'm actually not.
Oh, congrats.
No. I work on. God, it's really boring. I work on stuff that's directly related to revenue.
Okay.
That's it's not necessarily the product, but it is how we get our money from the insurance companies, all the billing and eligibility related stuff, nice. Which is without that the company doesn't exist. So I'm pretty sure I'll be all right there. Assuming the whole company stays afloat.
Yeah.
And I won't say too much more, but let's just say the stock price is not doing too well, though. Ooh. That's yeah. I'll send you the ticker symbol, and you can weep with me, because I was within spitting distance of being in the 2 comma club.
Oh man.
And yeah, right at like peak COVID, and man, we fell off pretty quick, but we're still doing okay.
Yeah, I would like to be not a cost center at some point in my career.
Yeah, that's gotta be rough. I've never really had a job where I've worked on a team that is a cost center, but it always seems like like IT kind of is like that, and that always seems like it's real rough because you're definitely treated differently and you're definitely looked at differently when it comes time for layoffs, which is never fun.
Yeah, so we're not part of IT. They call us operating technology or field services. It's almost the same type of thing, except instead of helping people with computers, you're helping them with whatever oil crap they need. So we need this pump isn't tuned correctly. Kind of mechanic type stuff, but there's programming involved, that kind of thing. I haven't really seen the kind of work I do get hit by layoffs, but we're always kind of the last to get additional headcount, just because it's not very visible, but it's not IT. We're still supporting operations, so we're not completely out in the woods, but it is what it is. It's not bad. It's fine. I would like to be in a role where my genius and talents generate money as opposed to just saving existing money. So someday.
Yeah. So something that you mentioned that we could maybe discuss, and this I think kind of leads into this, is how the oil and gas industry has fallen behind when it comes to tech. And so I'm kind of interested, what do you mean by that? How far behind is it?
So I wouldn't say fallen behind. It never was at parity. So the reasons it started out that way are kind of the inverse of the reasons it is the way it is now. So to start off with, at the very, very beginning, oil and gas companies were on the cutting edge of technology, because when people think of technology now, they're thinking of software and, advanced chips, processing power, data centers, that kind of thing. The further back you go, though, the more hardware-oriented technology was. And so the largest fiber optical deployment by a single company in the US was an oil and gas company. It was called Wiltel, I believe. Wiltel or Wilcom. And what they did is, as they were laying pipe throughout the US, they were laying fiber as well. And they ended up spinning that off into a separate company. That company went on to become Level 3 Communications, which some people might be familiar with. It was a very large internet backbone provider it got acquired again. I want to say it belongs to Cloudflare now.
Okay, they have a fairly large office not too far from where I live.
Okay, they might be them now. I'm not sure, but so when it was more hardware and physically constrained, oil and gas was a little more involved. So Williams companies also, or not Williams, sorry, Transco also had like the first nationwide coast to coast microwave data link going through the U.S. To control the pipe, but as it shifted more to software, they fell behind, the investment wasn't there, and a lot of the things that became standards in oil and gas were a result of people out in the field cowboying something together to try to get data back to the main office. It didn't start with a rigorous computer science background, and even back then, it was more of an afterthought as opposed to a primary purpose. Enron did do some exploration and building out of some of that. You still see some Enron standards out there, which is kind of what happens whenever you have a very large entity that dominates a specific field. You'll see kind of their fingerprints. You got Bell Labs. A bunch of the technologies that we have now are based off of Google specifications that originated there. It's kind of the same thing.
So when you say data, coming back from the pipes, what do you mean by that? Like what kind of data, and what do you do with it?
Yeah, so mostly pressures, flows, and temperatures. Those are the big three. And historically, all that's been done is to make sure that you're not overpressuring a pipe, that you don't have a leak, and so you can record how much product you moved, so you know the proper amount to charge. Very, very basic stuff. As time has progressed, there has been some data analytics happening, but the oil and gas companies so far have not been able to execute on any of the data that they have, at least on the outside of exploration and drilling. Exploration and drilling does have some more advanced analytics, but even that has lost some value because of what we were talking about with small producers being able to go out and horizontally drill. That was much more important when you were having to do, deep offshore drilling to make sure that you got that right. So I've got a friend that works for a software optimizer, or he makes software that does optimization for facilities and pipelines, chemical processes, that sort of thing. People will think that these stories are BS, but they're just not. The big tech, at least as far as oil and gas, as far as I can tell, has come in and hoovered up most of the talent. And so he is having to make programs for them that can do very simple analysis, such as linear regression. If you work at an oil and gas company and you're doing simple linear regression, you are ahead of more than 50% as far as applied analysis to the data that you have goes.
Wow.
At my company, I implemented a Z-score calculation to determine how anomalous a reading was today compared to its historic values over the past 4 days, to see if we could try to detect equipment failures before they occurred, see if things were going into alarm before they actually went into alarm. I've been doing this for a bit over a decade. I know quite a few people. I've worked at a few different companies. I do not know of a single other company that is even doing something as basic as a Z-score.
I was going to say, I know in manufacturing, that sort of thing is not too uncommon. IBM, in particular, provides a lot of software that large manufacturers use for detecting equipment failures ahead of time. Mm-hmm. Given how much money is on the line and how I'm sure expensive it is to fix something once it's actually really broken there, that's pretty surprising.
Yeah. So why this is so whenever oil was booming, we had a ton of money, like I was just talking about. So nobody cared about trying to squeeze the last bit of efficiency out of things, except on, very specific projects, such as, deep water drilling in the ocean. For, standard pipe running through, everyone was so flush with cash, didn't matter. Then once the bubble popped, there was never like an intermediate phase where we had okay amounts of cash. Now we are not an industry that is rich. Now we're not poor. I mean, it still pays, above median, but it's not, oh, I got $1 million to go throw at some project that might or might not pay off.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, like I was saying, you've got the talent problem. So there is, some social stigma. I don't think a lot, but there definitely is some of working in oil and gas. One of my team members actually quit this past year because it no longer aligned with his moral sensibilities to work in oil and gas, which, fair enough.
Does he work on a wind farm now?
Well, no. So he was leaving, and he said that the company he was going to work for was going to pick up some renewables, but they didn't have any on the books yet. And the guy he was going to work for was an old friend of his. The guy's kind of a dreamer. He's not a bad guy or anything. And I think the guy who worked for me is going to end up disappointed long term, especially now with Trump in office.
Yeah.
But yeah. So there is some stigma. So you're going to get some people that filter out on that. So whenever we did interviews a while back, if people remember my threads on Twitter about trying to hunt that down, there were not an insignificant portion of candidates who could even bring themselves to lie to us to tell us they didn't have a problem working in oil and gas, which I thought was funny. I don't know. I personally don't care enough if I'm hiring somebody, but my boss's boss is like, well, how do you feel about working in oil and gas from an ethical perspective? And they just couldn't bring themselves to say, it's fine, I like it. I don't know. People crack me up in interviews.
Or just at least say, yeah, it's whatever.
Yeah.
That's a little surprising, because I mean, if I had a problem, with an industry, I just wouldn't even interview, because I used to work in advertising. That's kind of how I got my start, because it's relatively easy to get into, just making websites for businesses and stuff. And, then I kind of end up working at an ad agency. And, I would say it was probably one of the good ones in terms of business practices and everything. So there wasn't anything that was like particularly shady about it, but I definitely had to kind of just, swallow some of my concerns with advertising. And now, now especially that I'm older and don't need the job like I did when I was, in my early 20s, I would never work in that industry, because I think advertising is vile. I hate all of it. Commercials just to me are like one of the worst things in the world. So consequently, if I got, an email from a recruiter for an ad agency or for anything, ad tech or anything remotely similar, like I just wouldn't even interview. So it's that is surprising, because I understand, like people have, misgivings. I think a lot of that is probably based off of propaganda, basically. I won't get into climate change or global warming here or anything, because I'm not even remotely qualified to have a serious opinion on that. But there's definitely, in my lifetime at least, been a real effort to just drill Fern Gully into the brains of every child.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, because like even if there are like serious drawbacks, to oil and natural gas and fossil fuels in general, it's like our entire civilization depends on that, at every level. It's just like not even just like for energy, but just like for the material goods that we use. I'm looking around my room right now, and like 80% of it is plastic.
Oh yeah.
Which is like I'm not super thrilled about that, but like I don't know, even despite the microplastics, man, I'm not so sure the alternative situation is much better,
Yeah. But I mean that just the interview thing surprised me, and I don't remember what the other part I was saying. Oh, I was talking about, talent being hoovered up.
Yeah.
And there's still a kind of pathological respect in oil and gas for engineers, and not the software kind.
Oh, okay.
Which is,
yeah, I can see that. I can see that.
It's not really valid anymore. And I've got a Twitter mutual who was here in Houston, who was a mechanical or chemical engineer. I don't remember which. He switched to programming because it despite the reverence for it, the salary isn't there. I have watched as software has eaten engineering jobs in oil and gas over the course of my career, and it doesn't seem to have registered with leadership or the engineers themselves. My favorite example was a couple of jobs ago. The mandate came down. We needed a pipeline that moved X amount of gas per day at this pressure, and this is how big the pipe was. And the engineer, and he was a smart guy too. This guy wasn't dumb. But he pulls up his software, he types in these parameters, and it suggests the size of compressors that he needed, and essentially gives him this huge parts list that even then would link to McMaster Car. And
love McMaster.
As a result of that, he just clicks and buys. And I mean, that stuff starts coming. You can't buy all of that from McMaster Car. Am I saying that name right? I may be screwing up the brand name. You know what I'm talking about, though.
No, I'm pretty certain that's correct.
And there were still decisions he needed to make, but in my opinion, watching it as, a dumbass with a business degree, they weren't engineering decisions. And I've watched that has slowly increased over time.
Yeah, because all the engineering was done in the software,
right,
in the development of that software. I mean, you can call the actual process of programming or whatnot, not engineering, which I'm personally pretty open to that. I think it is closer to an art than a lot of than an engineering. But when you're talking about something like that, where you're designing a system with the software, that engineering has to have been done in order to create the software.
Yeah.
At some point, someone who understands how these physical things work in the real world has to load those parameters into the software and make sure it all actually gives you the correct calculations.
The funniest thing about the niche of oil and gas that I occupy job-wise is we actually probably get paid more than a lot of the engineers, but the status that goes along with our job is very low. And it's lower than not just engineers, it's lower than a lot of other positions. And I wouldn't say we're treated disrespectfully or anything, but there is, I assume other places have this. I've only ever worked in oil and gas, but there's definitely a hierarchy of positions, right? So the VP in charge of drilling, everyone's going to defer to him over the VP of IT. There's gradients between that. But a lot of the customers that we have to answer to are probably making half of what we make, but their status within the company is much higher, and they are often dumber. And it's just it's a very strange feeling. It doesn't bother me as long as I'm getting paid. One of the guys that I hired onto my team had taught himself programming, and he had been in a different department that my department is a customer to. And so they're usually the ones ordering us around, telling us to do things. But it pays less. And he wanted to make more, and he found this job more interesting, taught himself programming, so I brought him on. And the very first thing I told him is I said, "You're making more now than anyone in the department that you were in. And one of your key responsibilities from now on is to eat shit. You will see what happens." And he was like, "Yeah, they have no idea what we do. They've got no idea. They don't know how busy we are." And it's something that we see play out. And I think also lots of people who would have gone into engineering 20 years ago are going into software development now because that's where the money's at and that's where the intelligence is required. And I'm not saying all engineers, but I would assume that there has been a decline in engineering quality. I will meet with these guys and they've got spreadsheets that they are using to hand calculate values. And I have solved many of these problems by telling them we can just calculate that in real time in the system and you can go pull it on demand and look at the trends. And it's, wow, I didn't know you could do that. Just played out, hundreds of times. It's crazy.
That's not too surprising to me. So you touched on something that I kind of wanted to bring up: hiring. You've had some interesting experiences there, and they've mirrored my experiences. So how do you feel about Fizz Buzz?
Man, I feel like this is going to get like kind of existential, and I'll try not to make it too political.
Oh no, please go ahead. Go ahead.
I am maybe not as much anymore a fairly hardcore libertarian. And I say not as much anymore, probably still compared to, anybody else, still pretty hardcore, but I used to be much more adamant, at least philosophically. And I feel like that was a compromise between like my deep bleeding liberal heart, like at my core, and my more engineering and kind of, I don't know, systemizing parts of myself, like an internal compromise. And I feel like I never doubted things, like IQ, and some people have abilities that some don't, that kind of thing. I just didn't think it was as bad as it is.
Oh, it's awful. It's worse than anyone, even on Twitter, thinks it is.
Yeah. And I just, as I have kind of progressed through my career, finding out how little some people understand about what they're doing or why they're doing it, and then going into these interviews, it's just been, I don't even know. Like, I have not seen anyone in my career, not just people reporting to me, I have not seen anyone who has been trained by another person to become a programmer. And what I mean is almost everyone, no, not almost everyone that I know who has wanted to program has taught themselves or taken some kind of initiative to teach it. I don't know that it's something that can be taught. I will admit I'm probably not good at training people, maybe. But it seems like you understand it or you don't. And so the guy that I brought in from another department, he was in his 50s. He had been a control room operator, and before that, he was a carpenter. No college experience, no previous, computer experience, but he just went and got on Microsoft's Azure course and taught himself some Azure stuff, and then started teaching himself Python. Now, he's not going to go, crank out a C++ program for screen sharing, but basic CRUD apps, he's able to do that now after like 2 years. And I don't know what to tell somebody if they can't do Fizz Buzz after 4 years of college.
What I would tell them is this probably isn't for you.
Yeah.
I've used Fizz Buzz before in interviews, and it's literally made people cry. Well, okay, just one person. I've worked with people who have somehow gotten, I didn't interview them, who have somehow gotten a job, where I worked, and, you start talking with them about stuff, and it's clear they don't understand, like, conditionals, like just simple, if this is true, then do this, sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And for me, that's like, I can't even imagine not understanding that. But I do think that is one of those things where, like, man, you either get that the first or second time someone explains it, or I don't know if it's ever gonna come to you.
Yeah. The number of people that I interviewed that failed Fizz Buzz who had years and years of experience, it was just crazy. I know there's lots of discourse around H-1Bs and all that kind of stuff, diversity hires, but I had a fairly good sample of candidates of various backgrounds, genders, ages.
It's not just limited to any particular demographic,
right? But what I'm saying is I haven't been able to figure out how to tell if someone understands what Fizz Buzz is without them doing it. If that makes sense. Like, I can't figure out what the indicator is that would give someone away as not being able to think through that kind of stuff. It just threw me for a loop. And this wasn't my first encounter with it. This was my first encounter of being completely in charge of the hiring process. And, like I was saying, we don't do a lot of super advanced programming, so I didn't throw anyone hard leak code problems or anything. And that's one reason why I'm not working for a big tech company, is because I haven't studied those. I don't really want to. I don't know that I'd be good at it if I did.
I'm not particularly good at the leak code stuff. I've done a lot of Project Euler. I do recommend at least looking into those. Those are a lot of fun.
I did those during college.
Yeah, slightly different style of problem.
But yeah, I just the kind of work that we're doing, if you can do some if statements and some basic SQL queries, you're probably covered.
Yeah, but that's going to filter.
Wait,
that right there filters a lot of people. A lot of people, even with CS degrees.
Yeah, I mean that's what was shocking. Yeah, I don't know what else to say. It just it surprises me. And it really, the most surprising thing would be telling people, ahead of time, I'm going to give them FizzBuzz. This is what FizzBuzz is. This is what you're going to have to do. And just not even being able to rote memorize that, in a couple days.
Yeah, that's oof. that's pretty blackpilling. Just to know, that there's people out there who can't do that, and they're still applying for programming jobs.
There's a lot of people taking up space, especially at bigger companies.
Yeah.
I had a guy work for me at my last job, and I don't think people will believe this story. He was illiterate.
Like, actually illiterate? Could he sign his own name?
He was. So I believe the correct term is, so there's illiterate where you can't read or write at all. Then I believe there is functionally illiterate, which is to say you can't surpass a specific reading grade level as far as comprehension is concerned.
Yeah. You may know the words, but like you string them all together and in a paragraph, and it doesn't mean anything to him.
Right.
Yeah.
So he also had a PhD in electrical engineering.
How?
So
my dad's an electrical engineer, so I'm familiar with what electrical engineers do.
So
how?
this whole saga. So I got brought into this. It's a company that I used to work for. They were doing a restructuring, and they wanted someone to come in and manage their application development team. And so I showed up, and I have this new team that's reporting to me. And there's this guy, he has an electrical engineering degree. He was originally from Bangladesh, but he's not, he's got permanent citizenship. He's, naturalized, all that kind of stuff. And they're telling me how brilliant he is and everything. I was like, oh, that's great. I've never had somebody that's got a PhD in chemical or electrical engineering before. I will make sure to put him to good use. I think he's being underutilized right now. So as time goes on, things were going okay, but he always wanted to talk. And at least for me, managing a team, it's much more difficult to have conversations involving voice because I can answer and do more things via text. If someone can send me a message or an email or something, I can queue it up and respond appropriately. But he was always wanting to call or walk over to my desk or whatever. But that's fine. Everyone's got different things. I'm getting paid the manager dollars. I'll suck it up. But then COVID hits, and we're all remote. And his performance nosedives. And at first I'm thinking, okay, it's probably just the work from home thing. Maybe he's worried or stressed. There were all kinds of things happening whenever lockdown started happening.
Maybe he's a little lazy.
Right, yeah. But then some things happened where I would send him an email and he would respond in ways that were almost entirely non sequiturs. Or I'd send him an email and he would immediately call me and ask questions that were contained within the email. And he would never send messages. He would never send emails. And I thought, he cannot read or write English. I said, there's no way. He's got a PhD, and the PhD was from an American university. This wasn't, something overseas. Okay. It was accredited.
Okay, so because you said he was Bangladeshi, so yes. I'm thinking, okay, maybe he got his PhD in Bangladesh and he speaks, I guess, Bengali and maybe reads Bengali or
right.
I'm sure there's probably a million other languages in Bangladesh I don't know about.
But so no, it was from a university in Texas, accredited, not even like Phoenix University or something. This is an accredited university with a campus in Texas. And I'm like, there's no way that he can't read or write English. There's got to be something else. So knowing he has a PhD, I did what anyone would do. I went and found his thesis. His thesis was full of misspellings. And not misspellings with like words reversed. Or even, what's the word I'm looking for? Homonyms, two things that sound the same.
Yeah.
Not even that.
Yeah.
They were, the best example was I kept running into the word mansions, as in like a house. Mansions, over and over in this thesis that he had.
An electrical engineering.
Right. And it didn't fit in the sentence. And I kept trying to figure out what this word was doing there. And then I read it out loud. He had meant mentions. And I start going through this paper, and there's all kinds of things like that. And so I went to my boss, because I was in this crappy team lead role to where I couldn't actually do anything. I don't know if you've had the privilege of being a team leader.
I haven't, but my wife has, so I'm familiar with the frustrations. I've heard all about them.
Worst gig. So I go to my boss, and I'm like, this guy cannot read or write English. And he says, it's funny that you mentioned that. And I said, oh, did something happen? He said, he called me the other day to say that since we've gone remote, he has been having trouble reading messages and responding to emails, and he finds it very difficult. And I said, here's his I pulled the PhD thesis. I mean, they're all, public, they're published.
Yeah.
I said, read this and look at how bad the writing is. I said, we have got to terminate him, or we've got to start sending him to English classes. I said, he cannot stay on the team and not be able to read or write English. I said, there's just no way. And then this guy's like, well, he's worked here for like 6 years. It's going to look really bad on the people that hired him before. I was like, it should. It should look really bad on them.
I'm just wondering how he was able to defend the thesis. I mean, don't you usually have to go before other people, with a whatever kind of PhD that you're aiming to get, and then explain to them, and they've presumably read it and peer reviewed it and been like, okay, this is good.
I don't know. The guy also did have a legitimate speech impediment. So I don't know if that somehow allowed him to wiggle out of a traditional defense. I don't know. And all these questions are why I don't think anyone will actually believe this story, which is fine. But it was crazy. The funniest.
Oh, I believe you, because this isn't something you could make up.
But he, so we ended up doing nothing. This company that I was at,
of course,
we did nothing. And I ended up leaving there because of that and some other things that had come up. But I left, and after I left, he left because he managed to get himself a promotion to go work at a different company, doing the same kind of work. I don't know how he managed that. The oil and gas interview process traditionally is not very rigorous. I've never actually had to do a technical test in my entire career in oil and gas, ever.
Wow.
At this job, I was the first person to implement it for our department, pulling that ladder up behind me. And 2 jobs ago, I was also the first person to suggest it because we hired somebody who could not program, and they were on a contract, so we were able to terminate them relatively quickly. But I did push through us doing some very basic Fizz buzz type stuff the next time we went to hire somebody. Usually people just have a conversation and a handshake. And the results are about what you would expect, which is to say pretty bad.
Yeah. Every job I've had before my current one, there's been a technical test or some kind of take-home project that would be, I guess, pre-LLM, pretty difficult to fake. But for my current job, it was pretty weird. It was a referral situation, so that probably was in my favor quite a bit. But I went in for the interview with the guy who would be my manager, and he ended up getting fired because he was awful. at his job. Hands down the worst boss I've ever had, which is probably not going to make me look too good here in a minute, because the interview mostly consisted of him bringing up the code, for the main application, at the company I work for, and then just kind of talking about it and just like, okay, well, what do you think is wrong with this? And I pointed out some stuff, and that was really the only like actual technical part of the interview. And, that's definitely not how we do interviews now.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, it seemed pretty strange to me, and knowing what I know now about that guy, it was pretty par for the course for him, because he definitely just kind of always did his own thing, and that was eventually why he was let go, is because he had us like working on Fridays on his like a little pet project that he had, that he wanted to like pull out of nowhere and impress the VP of the department or whatever, and eventually that kind of got found out, because it's like we were supposed to have all of the rest of our work done in the 5 days worth of work in 4 days, and then we'd spend our Fridays working on this fun cool thing or whatever, and when the VP found out about that, he got shit canned real fast.
Okay, so you said you've never been like on the cost center side of things, right?
No.
I would guess that guy probably came from the cost center side of things. This is such a classic management story of someone who doesn't understand what their value is. I've seen this play out so many times. So what happens is you get somebody who is a cost center, you get a VP of IT, you get a manager in IT, etc. And they're convinced that they can do something with extra hours, off hours, divert a little bit of time, and create something new that will be a revenue generator, and they will no longer be a cost center, and the company will look favorably upon them. This never works. I've seen it kill not like a ton of managers, because I haven't seen that many over 10 years, but I've seen this pattern play out at least 5 times. And it just never goes as expected, because I think to even attempt to do that betrays yourself as having a lack of knowledge about what you're supposed to be doing to begin with, which probably implies larger incompetence at the actual goal that you're wanting to achieve.
Oh, he was incredibly incompetent. Yeah. As a manager, as a person, in just every aspect of his life, he was not good at really anything.
So I got to see this from the outside actually just a few months ago. So I've talked about it some on Twitter. I had a side business, maybe still have, on a large infrastructure project to do some mapping work and some GIS data gathering. It was supposed to be the meal ticket out of the middle class. There's been some court cases, etc., that have forestalled it probably indefinitely. But recently, the project management firm that the state of Oklahoma had one of their IT people reaching out to us, asking some very strange questions from me and my business partner. My business partner was getting spooked. He's never worked in a big corporate gig. He's always worked independently. He's had this business that I'm kind of part of now. His like entire adult life, he inherited it from his parents. So he's not been in a corporate environment to see politics play out and stuff. But he's getting frustrated because this guy emails us at Friday nights. Every Friday night, we hear nothing until that Friday night. And he's like, hey, I need this by Tuesday, 8 a.m. And so we would kind of bust our ass, put something together, send it to him, and then just radio silence. Did we do a good job? Did we do a bad job? Is he trying to cut us out of the project? We don't know. This goes on for a couple of months. My partner's getting more and more like anxious and frustrated and irritated. And I said, what is this guy's job there? And he's like, oh, he's in charge of this IT department thing. I'm trying not to get too specific because this would be pretty easily identifiable. I said, oh, no. Hold on. He is just trying. The reason he's sending this to you late Friday night is because he is working on something on his own and he's presenting it Tuesday morning in their meetings. And he's wanting you to work on this. And he's planning to show this to his boss once he's got it done. and say that they can provide, because they were kind of a consulting firm, that they don't just have to be IT. They can provide some services to clients by doing this. And now, instead of his team being a cost center, their team they can turn out for billable hours. And I said, what you need to do, take what I just said, call the project manager of the actual project, ask him about this. He did, and that's exactly what it turned out being. This guy did, a few weeks later, ended up getting his hand slapped. It wasn't devastating for him. He didn't get shit canned or anything. But yeah, it was exactly that. He was hoping to transition from a cost center into getting billable hours.
It's a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea. I distinctly remember when the VP found out about what my then boss was doing, and one of the people on my team asked him, like, what was the priority of the stuff that we had been working on Fridays, and he just like rolled his eyes and was like, so far down you can't even begin to see it.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, the other pattern you get to see play out in oil and gas companies, I think, is people trying to cargo cult Google or Uber or something. I don't know if that's endemic elsewhere.
I can tell you the problem that I've seen is microservices. That's a whole, cargo culting microservices into places where they do not necessarily belong. That's a real problem. At least in my experience.
I haven't seen too much of that. I think oil and gas is probably too far behind the curve to get into that.
They haven't caught up to Hacker News 2011.
No, not at all. My favorite thing was at the last company I was at. We had about 5,000 employees total. Not a big company. And about half of those are field workers whose only interaction is checking their email, right, on their laptop. They're not doing anything else. They designed this whole centralized data hub. And that's where all data from any department was going to be stored in this database. And if you needed data from that database, that's where you would get it. No longer could I go to the department in charge of nominations and set up a read-only ODBC link and just query their data. No, I had to go to the central data hub, which was a SQL server that was behind a web server of some kind. I don't know what specific technology they were using. And you had to query the server with HTTP requests that were managed by Microsoft SQL Server Information Services, SSIS packages, I think.
Oh my God.
And I say cargo culting like Google and stuff. I don't think Google would do anything this dumb. What their argument was is that by putting this HTTP interface in front of the server, they could cache the results and it would scale better. And I was like, how many people right now are querying this database? Like, how many accounts do you have? Well, there's only 15 accounts right now. I was like, well, what kind of load are you looking at? Well, it's very low, but this is going to grow in the future. So I was like, I gave up. There's nothing I could do about it. But we start digging in, and you might remember this story. I think I've probably told it on Twitter multiple times. But what we find out is the database is not idempotent.
I remember this.
Whenever data was loaded in, there was a bit that was set to false to indicate if that data had been read by your account. It was account specific. And so if you fired that process and read that data, it was then marked as true. And if you ran the exact same request against this database, you would get no values back. This caused so many problems because you're dealing with HTTP. And especially, at least on the controls side, the SCADA side, we were firewalled off from everyone. Like, we treated the rest of the company as the rest of the company treated the external internet. So there were times where there would be firewall disruptions or something, network disruptions, because we were on a completely separate network, everything. So if you fired that HTTP request and something happened anywhere in that entire link that caused you to not get the data back after the rows were marked as red, you had to go call somebody to reset the rows and stuff. This was so frustrating. This is one of the many reasons why I couldn't stay at that company anymore.
That would make me quit. If my job involved that as like a core part of anything that I was working with, I would quit over that. That's awful.
The other thing is the control system is 24/7, so we're high availability. And we do a lot of stuff kind of the opposite of the way like you hear about things being done now in larger companies. They've got Kubernetes clusters that are all kind of, self-healing, or they just spin up a new cluster because everything's not, you're not storing things with state. So you can just take VMs up and down and load balance stuff as you please. Ours is kind of the opposite. We have very limited change control. So changes are very small. They have to be well tested because you can open a valve and close a valve, but you can't unclose a valve. Which is sometimes hard for people to understand. Like worst case scenario, assuming you've got good backups of an IT system, the worst thing that happens is you have to restore from a backup and you lose some data. Now, if you don't have backups, that's a completely separate story. But there's a way that you can recover. You can't unmove atoms out in the field if you fuck something up. So we have to be very deliberate. So we have this high availability uptime. If the system's not up, we have to send people to sites to man them because they're no longer automated, etc. And so I asked them, I said, your database has some information in it that is critical for operations. Previously, we could just query that database directly. And if for some reason that database was down, we could call the person on call for that department and they could tell us what the values were. And we had a process to kind of manually key them in. This wasn't like a huge spreadsheet, but it was like 5 items of super critical information that had to be there at a certain time. And since you don't know when you get no rows back, if something bad happened or not, it wasn't always clear that you should just call somebody. But I asked them, I said, is your system highly available? Yes. I said, okay, what's your uptime? We're up 24/7 except for the third Saturday of every month. I said, that's not high availability. I said, what are we supposed to do on the third Saturday of every month? Well, we're working on a solution. And I'm looking at my boss. He's like, I don't know. I said, so we're going to go to this.
Were they down for the whole day Saturday?
Yeah, they were down for 18 hours. This was like a sitcom or something, because I get told that we have to move to this system by a certain date. And we have, the non-idempotent thing is there. We'll have to figure out some way around that. But this outage thing, I can't program around that. I need that data. And this deadline's coming up. And I'm telling my boss that it's not going to work Saturday. He's like, well, I think maybe they've got something figured out. I said, they don't, though. And I'm just seeing this third Saturday. We've cut the system over. I was unable to avoid it. I couldn't talk anyone out of it. And this date is coming. And I just decided that day I'm going to stay home and be on my laptop because I know what's going to happen. And it comes, and the database is down. Like they said. They didn't lie to us. And I call my boss. The system's not working because they're down for maintenance on the third Saturday of the month. Well, they got to get it back up. It was just, I don't know how to even articulate the situation. It was so absurd. We went from a solution that worked with just a JDBC connection to an Oracle database to this. It kills me. I hate it. I just don't get it. It's like that scene in Austin Powers with the steamroller, that's slowly coming and the guy just won't get out of the way. Exactly like that.
Yeah, no, we've had some things like that happen at my job. Not quite as absurd, but just sort of like we're going from something that works to something much more convoluted that doesn't necessarily work. And it's real frustrating trying to explain, to anyone, like why this is a bad idea.
Yeah. So, we were talking about hiring. Are you managing a team, or are you just part of the hiring process?
No, thank God I'm not managing. I don't know if I have any real interest in ever doing that. No, my company does have developers actually as part of the process, which is nice. I've worked places where it's you don't get interviewed by any peers, which is honestly I think that's kind of a red flag. So it's I get pulled into interviews, not as much as I did about a year ago, but that's a whole nother story involving offshoring, and I won't get into any of that.
No interest though.
Yeah, I don't know. Definitely not at where I work now. Maybe somewhere else, but where I work, it would not be a good move. Yeah, for a lot of reasons.
That's fair. Yeah, I never realized. I mean, I say never. I mean, I know that now. I don't know when it occurred to me that lots of people don't want to be in management positions.
Yeah, I work with several people who are extremely adamant about never being in management, and I'm open to it in theory, but like I said, just not necessarily where I'm at, because we have a lot of like real communication problems, and so I know that I would spend a lot of time in meetings, which I guess all management does, but it would be meetings that really don't serve any purpose, or meetings where you're
yeah,
because I get pulled into them sometimes, and it's just we're just not very good at disseminating information in the company, and so that means lower level management especially is often put into just really unfortunate situations.
the last place I was at, we had a ton of meetings. Where I'm at now, we really don't, and I do manage to keep my team out of most of them. We do have a daily stand-up, which I know most developers hate, is my understanding. I never had a hate for it, even when I was not a manager. Yeah, I don't know. I like...
It depends on how much I've gotten done in the last day.
Something that I do, maybe other people do this, I don't like, and I don't find it useful to have everyone in the meeting and do the, what did you do yesterday, what are you doing today thing. Nobody's paying attention. And you're doing this in serial. It's wasting everyone's time. They're waiting until it's their turn, and they're rattling stuff off, and they're not paying attention anymore. What I do, and I don't remember where I found this, it's not an original invention. The term that I heard it called was walk the board. So instead, we're using a Kanban board. So instead of being like, Jack, what did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? Jimmy, what did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? Instead, we go off of a task basis, and we start with the rightmost column, the most complete, and work our way down and back. So it doesn't just stick to one person, so people are a little more engaged. And it actually does generate some discussion about tasks between people, because they're actually paying attention to what's being talked about. Now, I'm not going to claim it's like huge enlightening conversations every time, but I have found it to be much more useful than just having somebody read off their stuff and move on to the next person.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the other part of that is, since it's kind of task-based instead of person-based, I'm only asking them about stuff that is relevant to me or the rest of the team. So it's whatever Kanban card we've got pulled up, as opposed to just a recounting of their day. So if they spent 4 hours doing something that's not on the board, I don't care. Nobody else cares, assuming it's not like due to performance issues or something. And even then, that's not something for the daily stand-up.
Yeah, that sounds a lot more fruitful than your typical stand-up. Because yeah, I will admit, I totally tune out.
Oh, I did too.
On my current team where I'm at, we're not really doing a lot of stuff that involves collaboration. Mm-hmm. It's, we're all working on similar related things, but it's like I've got my tasks and they've got theirs, and there's, we're not really doing anything together with them. So when they start talking about their Jira cards, it's like, I don't really care.
Yeah. No, I mean,
it doesn't involve me at all.
Yeah. No, I mean, I hated it too whenever I was not in management, and I didn't want to, just have a daily stand-up for people to tell me stuff. That's useless. I've got, like, a passion for managing, which is super lame and sounds fake, but it kills me how bad most management practices are. And I think that is largely because most people have treated management as some kind of innate leadership quality. And I don't think that's the right way to look at it. I think there are such things as like innate leadership qualities, but for maybe being CEO or leading men to war or something, I don't think you need innate leadership qualities to manage your 3 to 8 person dev team that is building another CRUD app.
You think that can mostly just be learned?
Yeah, assuming you have somebody of, reasonable competency.
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah.
I think, especially going back to what we were talking about with Fizz, I think that goes without saying with just about anything.
Yeah. But, I think there is a social aspect to it still. And some of that is innate. I'm not a very outgoing, extroverted person. So some of that does take some more work. But yeah, I think there are a set of skills that you can take and be an effective manager, at least in the current environment. And I think part of that is being more deliberate about how you're using people's time. And I think the common daily stand-up is a symptom of not thinking about what you're doing. So we schedule 15 minutes. It's a 4-person team, so it's pretty small already. But we usually finish our daily stand-up in 8 minutes. And if we don't finish in 8 minutes, that usually means something has come up and we're looking at a 30-minute stand-up because we're actually discussing something.
Oh, I've been in stand-ups that have lasted an hour before.
Yeah, that's
torturous.
I think part of that is some managers maybe who don't have the innate leadership thing. A lot of them are cowards in a variety of ways. And I don't think they have the guts to go interrupt somebody and ask for an update. And then you have, I think, the complete opposite. I don't know if you've had managers like this who have no problem messaging you every 3 hours for an update on whatever it is they're interested in.
I fortunately have not worked for anyone like that. I'm aware that's a thing, and I count myself very lucky. I've never had a boss that's that much of a micromanager.
The guy that I had that did that, it didn't even feel like micromanaging. It felt like extreme anxiety on his part that he was trying to soothe. Like he wasn't even
I think that's a part of what micromanaging is. I don't think you can separate the anxiety from it.
Yeah, I can see that. He wasn't even a dick about it. It was just it was irritating. But yeah, I think I don't want to interrupt what he's doing, so I'll just get everything during the daily stand-up. But that's being disrespectful of everyone else's time. I got a whole list of things like that are minor, and maybe they don't actually matter, right? Because there's all kinds of studies. I think we've shown that these nudges and such that we thought were doing things, they don't replicate. And so maybe the things I'm talking about are BS and just me projecting onto it. But like one thing is never asking questions unless you're genuinely asking. So, I think lots of managers try to be polite and say, can someone do X, or, looking for volunteers.
Oh, I hate that.
Yeah.
Just pick one of us and tell us to do it.
So I try to not do that because, again, it, and I think lots of people would laugh. It is difficult to try to just tell somebody to do something, or at least it is for me. I do it, but there's a level of uncomfortableness.
You can phrase it. You can phrase it like an ask, but just for politeness' sake,
right?
But yeah, I'm really not a fan of the manager goes into the group chat and asks, can someone take a look at this?
Right.
Because the thing is it always ends up with they have to pick someone anyways.
Yeah.
And and in the meantime you're just sitting there going, okay, is anyone else going to do this?
Right.
Am I looking bad because I'm not volunteering? I don't know. It's just it's dangerously close to a mind game, to me. And I know it isn't necessarily always that, but it can feel like it depending on who's asking for volunteers. Because I've had a manager, my previous manager was very much like that.
Yeah. So I try not to ask a question unless I'm genuinely asking, and I think also just blatantly saying things like that to your team. I don't think a lot of managers let their team know about their own internal state or what they're saying or implying. So I've told.
What do you mean by that?
So what I mean by that is like I've told my team, you know, one of my big goals is to remove ambiguity. I've told them I don't want you to ever think that, like you said, like there is a mind game, like there's some kind of trick question, that there's something I'm asking without asking.
Mm.
If I'm asking you a question, I am genuinely asking, and you should never mistake my questions for a way of telling you to do something. If I need you to do something, I will just say that.
Yeah.
And I've told them that, it's, not told them, I regularly tell them, it's much easier for them to over communicate than it is to under communicate. If you're communicating too much, I can tell you to back off. Whenever you are a manager and you're interacting with people, you have to take into account that no matter what happens, how long you've known people, that there is always a sign around your neck indicating the power imbalance. And, I don't think that's bad. It is what it is. So anything you say has a weight of power behind it that it doesn't for other people. And so I've seen managers that are very cavalier, joking about layoffs and that kind of thing. And they're not being malicious at all. They're just having fun. And I think that's like a dangerous game to play, and that can spiral out of control pretty quickly.
Oh, the guy who I was referring to who hired me on at my current job, who got let go, he would do stuff like that.
Yeah.
He would threaten people on my team.
Oh, I've had a boss that's actually threatened, yeah.
Like threaten coworkers with, I'm going to get you fired, over just really dumb stuff. It was, like I said, just total incompetence top to bottom there.
Yeah. And, lots of managers are bad at giving feedback, positive or negative. And most of them wait until something's actually become a problem before they say anything.
Yeah.
So, I try not to do that, because then it can be a little more casual. But also, whenever saying positive things about somebody, general praise isn't very effective. You've got to try to say specific things about what they did that was good, so that they'll keep doing more of that. And not in like a Pavlovian type sense, but like in a, they're trying to figure out their career. If you just say, hey, that was a great job yesterday, that doesn't really give them anything to work with to know what you liked or what the rest of the company liked or anything. Yeah, just stuff like that. And the guy that I ended up hiring, this is his first job out of college. And so I feel like I'm getting to tell him a lot of things that I had to figure out on my own. And I think one thing programmers, engineering types are susceptible to is the idea of appearances not mattering.
Yeah. That's a dangerous meme amongst anyone who's gone through a computer science program.
Yeah. And what I've tried to communicate to him and others in the past is, you're right on some level that appearances don't matter, and they don't really matter very much to me. But they matter to my boss or my boss's boss. And so whatever his reality is, whatever his benchmark is my benchmark, regardless of whether or not I agree with it, because he's the one writing the checks. And so you have to internally, at some point, understand that there is some overlap between looking good and doing good. And appearance isn't everything, but it's definitely a component of a quality product.
Yeah, no, one thing I did take away from my job at an ad agency that has really stuck with me, and I actually genuinely took to heart, is always stay on brand. That's really, really important, particularly if you're talking about things like indicating that you're a quality product. Mm-hmm. Because something that, I've noticed, and it's a lot of people have noticed, is that, when you're branding, when you're, just even things like, the fonts you use or the colors you use, or just the, using an old logo next to a new one and stuff, just things like that. What it does is it doesn't inspire confidence that you have, something cohesive there. And that's, if you're trying to sell something, and I think that's the thing, is like, your programmers will have a tendency to think that they're not trying to sell something when really they are. And if you're kind of just scattershot, with how you're doing that, it will really make, whoever's you're trying to get to buy whatever you're selling. And I don't even necessarily mean like buy in terms of like, transactions for $1. I mean, just like, it could be something like, hey boss, let's use this technology or whatever.
Right.
If you don't inspire some kind of confidence there, it makes it really hard for that person to get on board.
Yeah.
And so, it's just staying on brand. It's pretty important. I'll DM you some stories, because if I can't, they'd be pretty doxy. There's one in particular that's really funny. Just a client that, man, it was. Anyways, so we're at 2 hours.
Yeah.
I'm also getting pretty tired, so we should probably wrap this up, because this is gonna be a beast to edit. So I guess before we go, where can people find you? And besides Speakeasy, I guess where can they find that? What have you got in the works? What would you like to shill?
I got nothing except my Twitter account. That's really it. I don't have anything for Speakeasy yet. It's just a collection of Twitter threads at this point. Speakeasy.im will be the website at some point, hopefully in the next month or so. But yeah, I've got nothing. You can dig up the suicide of expertise.com on the Internet Wayback Machine to see some terrible writing if you want to, completely unedited. But that's it. What's a book I want to plug that is not mine? The Power Broker. That's what I'm reading right now. Fantastic book. Read that.
And who's that by?
I don't know. It's about Robert Moses. It's a nonfiction.
Okay.
It is by Robert Caro. It is a 60-hour-long audiobook. I don't know how big it is in print. 1,300 pages. It's very, very big. It's very good.
All right, I will link that in the show notes. Awesome. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much. It's not real.